So you're saving for retirement in a workplace retirement account like a 401k, 403b, perhaps the TSP, and you have a big decision to make. Do you contribute to the traditional 401k or the Roth? Now remember, with the traditional, you get a tax break on federal income tax, and maybe if you pay state income tax where you live, state income tax with a traditional contribution. With a Roth contribution, no tax breaks now, but when you take the money out in retirement, assuming you follow all the rules, it's tax-free. With a traditional account, when you take the money out in retirement, it's treated as ordinary income and you have required minimum distributions to worry about. So the question is, should you pick the traditional or should you pick the Roth? And that's the question we're going to tackle today. It comes from a viewer named Jason. Let me read you his email to me. He said, "Hey Rob, recently started researching your retirement and love your content. I just turned 50 and my wife is almost 41. All of our retirement savings are in 401ks. I'm wondering your thoughts on switching our 401k contributions from traditional to a Roth 401k. We obviously lose the pre-tax benefit, but gain the tax-free growth. We're hoping to each retire at 55. So 5 years for me and 15 for my wife. Do you think this makes sense?" Well, it's a great question, a great opportunity to talk about traditional versus Roth. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to start with sort of, I'll call it the traditional way to think about contributing to a traditional versus a Roth. But then I'm going to share with you a simple strategy that I think can save a truckload in taxes potentially, and that actually makes the analysis much, much easier. So that's what we're going to do. Now, I think a lot of what we're talking about today would apply to IRAs as well. Just keep in mind the rules are a bit different, right? You can make too much money to qualify for Roth IRA contributions. And at the same time, depending on your circumstances, you may not be able to deduct contributions to a traditional IRA. So just keep in mind the rules are different. But by and large, we're talking mainly focused on just traditional versus Roth. So let's dive right in. And let's start with sort of, I'll call it the traditional way of thinking about this. And I've talked about this on the show in the past. And it's simply comparing the taxes you'd pay today if you contribute to a Roth, because remember, you don't get any tax breaks. So how much would you pay in taxes today if you made Roth contributions instead of traditional? And then fast forwarding to retirement and comparing that to what you'd pay in taxes in retirement if you took money out of a traditional, say 401k or IRA. At that time. And you want to compare the two. Of course, the goal is simple, right? We want to pay as little in taxes as we can. And so, if you're going to pay less in taxes today, you'd rather just pay them. So Roth, right? And that might apply to you if you're in the lower income tax brackets today, potentially. If you're going to pay less taxes in retirement, maybe because today you're in a higher tax bracket, maybe you live in a high tax state, well, then traditional might make sense now. And here's the thing about that analysis. It can be very difficult to have confidence that we're making all of the right assumptions. We can probably figure out what our tax liability will be this year if we contribute to a Roth, what our tax savings would be if we contribute to a traditional, right? But boy, how do we project out years, maybe even decades into the future? And here, I think it's worth just taking a minute to think about all of the different factors that could affect the taxes we might pay in retirement when we pull money out of a traditional. Obviously, whatever the tax laws are in the future, that's one. Where you live, maybe you'll change states and live in a higher tax state or a lower tax state, or maybe even a no income tax state, right? The balance of your traditional accounts, that'll affect your RMD requirements. It could be, are you going to work in retirement? Maybe there's going to be some part-time income. That could affect your taxes. How much you're going to be getting in Social Security and how much of that will be taxable. That could be a big factor. Do you plan to make charitable contributions out of an IRA? That can reduce and account for some of your RMDs. So there are just a lot of factors that are very difficult to know for certain. And by the way, I haven't even touched on your tax filing status. Maybe you're married today. Could be divorce, could be death, changes your tax filing status. Maybe you're single today, you have no plans to get married, and who knows, 10 years from now you get married, you're in a different tax filing status. So there are a lot of factors that can affect our tax liability in retirement, and all we can do today is make our best guess. Now, there is software you can use to help you do that. I use New Retirement I'll just show it to you briefly, and then we'll talk about this strategy I mentioned. So this is a demo account. The thing I want to show you, they do have Roth conversion tools that you can use, and I've done a video on that in the past. But the other thing it does is when you put in all your income, all your investment accounts, your retirement accounts, you have to make assumptions about the returns that those accounts will earn. So again, a lot of assumptions, but one of the things New Retirement then shows you, and this is at the federal level, is your income by tax bracket. And this can be very useful in understanding when you might go with traditional versus Roth, comparing your tax brackets today versus your tax brackets in retirement, but keeping in mind that the tax bracket is just the starting point, right? Because ultimately what we're wanting to know is your effective tax rate, because income can affect how much of your Social Security is taxed. It can affect IRMA and your Medicare premiums. So yes, it's a lot of moving parts if we're comparing our tax situation today with what it'll be years in the future when we start pulling money out in retirement. At the end of the day, it's often just a best guess. If you're at one extreme or the other, lowest tax brackets, Roth probably makes sense. The absolute highest tax brackets, and perhaps two if you're in a high state income tax situation, traditional might make sense. But for most of us, we're somewhere in the middle. It can be a difficult analysis. So that brings me to the strategy and Jason's question. So we don't have to compare our tax situation just with today versus some point in the future when we're retired. We can also look at our tax situation for many of the years in between. Why? Because we can do Roth conversions, right? If we contribute to a traditional, the question is going to be, when do we have to pull that money out? If we wait until retirement and pull it out as we need it for spending, okay, that's when the taxes get triggered. But we can trigger those taxes early. We have a lot of control as to when we pay Uncle Sam, and we can do that through Roth conversions. We might say at the age, in Jason's case, he retires 55. He may say at 55, I'm in a really low tax bracket now because I don't have a job. Now, in his case, it's a little more complicated because his wife will keep working, assuming they're filing, married filing jointly. He's got to factor that in. But he may be in a really low or at least lower tax bracket than he is during his working years. So he could decide, hey, I'm not going to wait until I'm, in my 60s, let's say, to pull money out for spending. I can trigger some of the taxes now with a Roth conversion. Now, here are a couple things to keep in mind. If you're in a workplace retirement account like a 401k, they may or may not allow you while you're still working to convert that over to their Roth 401k. You can check with them to see if they allow it. But even if they don't, say in Jason's case as an example, when he turns 55, he retires, he can move that to an IRA and then start doing as many Roth conversions in any amount he wants each year, of course, subject to his tax analysis. So this is the real strategy. If you're going to retire particularly before you start taking Social Security, and it's even better if it's before Medicare and the analysis that goes into the IRMA sort of increased premiums 3 years before you start taking Medicare. In this case, that would be Jason. He's retiring at 55. It would apply even if, say, you retired at 60 for a couple of years. You may say, look, yeah, I don't know what my tax situation is going to be when I'm 70 because I've got Social Security. We're pulling money out. RMDs, when they kick in, complicated. But early retirement, not so complicated. I don't have RMDs. I don't have Social Security. Don't have to worry about the IRMA and Medicare. I actually have at least a pretty good idea. That I don't know everything. I don't know what the tax laws will be, but I've got at least a reasonable idea that I'll be in a lower tax bracket, let's assume, than in my working years. That could be a great time to start doing some Roth conversions to fill up a certain number of tax brackets. And by the way, the Roth conversion tool in New Retirement, again, they're a sponsor of this channel, but they're also the tool that I use. You can use that tool to say, hey, what would the conversions look like if I fill up to whatever tax bracket you choose? And by the way, New Retirement's not the only tool that does that, so you can certainly choose others as well. But you could start doing those Roth conversions when you're retired and in those lower income tax bracket years. If we go back to New Retirement, we don't see it in this demo. But if this were modeling Jason's case or someone who retired early, let's just assume you retired early in 2034. What you would likely see right in here is these tax brackets drop all the way down. I've seen some situations where they're gone. There is no bar chart for 4 or 5 years, no bars, because there's no the standard deduction wiped out any tax liability. So you could fill up those years at least to some tax bracket, maybe the 12 or I guess it'd be 15% by then. Or depending on your situation, you might even fill it up to the 22%. Just depends on your specific circumstances with Roth conversion. So the end result is you get the tax breaks now of a traditional contribution when you're in a higher tax bracket. And then you got to still pay taxes, but with Roth conversions in your early retirement years, you can potentially pay them at a much lower rate. Of course, you've got to do the analysis. Every situation is different, but it's a strategy that I think can be very, very effective. And it can take a lot of it doesn't take all of the uncertainty out, but it can take a lot of the uncertainty out as compared to trying to do the analysis when RMDs are happening and you're getting Social Security and you have a lot more income to sort of try to figure out. So I think it can be sort of a win-win if it works for you. Obviously, it applies for those retiring before taking Social Security, I think is the primary factor. But if it's even before IRMA analysis kicks in, that would be even better. So there you go. Keep in mind, I am not a tax expert. So you get something wrong here, it can have significant consequences. So I do recommend that you talk to a CFP or a tax professional and make sure you've got the analysis right and you're doing the right thing. Again, I use New Retirement, and they even offer for an extra fee CFPs that you can talk to if you want their help in doing the tax analysis as well. So there you go, Jason. Great question. Hopefully this has been helpful. At least give you a strategy to consider. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'll be happy to help you out any way I can. And until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.